Hi, good morning. Welcome to the St. Charles Community College panel on COVID-19. My name is Paul Roesler. I'm the Department Chair of Political Science here at SCC. And I'm really excited we're having this panel because while COVID is obviously a big major health emergency in this country, it's also an issue that relates to the role of government, how much the government can or should do to fight this pandemic. Our panel of experts is going to discuss medical questions surrounding COVID-19 and the vaccines. We're excited especially to have Sara Evers, the acting director of St. Charles County Department of Health. I think I got that title right. And she's going to discuss the government efforts to fight the pandemic here in St. Charles. Sara joined us in April to discuss COVID-19, and we're pleased to have her back given the rise of the new Delta variant. But before we turn it over to Sara, two of our biology faculty members, Monica Hall-Woods and Nicole Pinaire, will discuss some of the medical questions surrounding COVID-19 and how the vaccines work. Amy Koehler, the Provost of the Dardenne Creek Campus and former nursing faculty, will also be here to answer questions, and she'll introduce Sara more formally in a little bit. Our plan is to have time at the end for questions. I'm also going to keep my computer open down here, so if you're live streaming us and you have questions, I should be able to see those as well. So feel free to post those questions, and I should be able to ask our panelists. Just one little shout out before we begin. I want to thank Mike Koehler, who has organized this thing for over 20 years, Democracy Days for 20 years. I'm on the panel that puts this together, but it's Mike Koehler's baby. He has done a fantastic job every year, year in, year out. It's a lot of work harassing us faculty to get projects together. So I'm just a shout out to Mike Koehler for all the work he does. There's still two more events after this. There's an event at 1 o'clock. It's on Zoom only. And tonight, to wrap up, there's a fantastic presentation by a few of my colleagues at 200 years old. So please stick around and watch this great panel, but also show up tonight at 7 o'clock and at 1 o'clock too for the other last two panels of the year. So, come on.
Oh, don't know where our names went.
It disappeared.
It disappeared.
Our title disappeared.
No, the title disappeared. But hi, everyone. I am Dr. Nicole Pinaire.
And I'm Dr. Monica Hall-Woods.
And we are biology faculty here at SCC. And the title of our talk today is COVID-19 RNA vaccines and SARS-CoV-2 variants and common misconceptions. So Monica's going to go ahead and get us started.
Okay, so this is just a brief overview, just so you know what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what SARS-CoV-2 is. I'm also going to discuss what is a variant and how do our variants arise. And then Dr. Pinaire will be talking more about how these viruses replicate in your cells and what the vaccine is all about and how we develop these vaccines. We'll also talk about risks of vaccines today and common misconceptions associated with vaccines and COVID and SARS-CoV-2, and a little bit more about breakthrough cases. So first and foremost, I need to make certain everybody understands what a virus is. And so what you're seeing on the screen ahead of you here is a diagram of a typical structure of a virus. And so every virus is going to have some sort of genome, which is where their genes are located. Our cells all have DNA as our genome, and we use DNA as the code to make proteins. So the intermediate molecule to go from DNA to proteins is RNA. But viruses are very different. First of all, viruses are not living entities. They are not living cells. They cannot reproduce on their own. They must infect your cells or other organism cells in order to be able to replicate. So viruses can exist in this very unusual state. They either have DNA as their genome or they have RNA as their genome. And then that genome is protected by a protein capsid or coat. And that's what you're seeing here on the board, is the green part is the genome, and the blue and the red part is this protein coat. Now, viruses have evolved to infect a wide range of organisms. Just about every organism on this planet has a virus associated with it. Even bacteria are infected with viruses. Our animal viruses that we have usually have an additional coating on the outside of that protein coat, and that is a lipid or fatty molecule or coating made up of lipids or fats that kind of make up our cell membranes. And so that's something very specific about our animal cells, is that they have these specific structures. Now, you can go ahead and switch it, Nicole. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about the differences of some of these terms that you've been hearing, like a coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. It's very important to understand the difference between these terms. So coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that can cause disease in humans and other organisms. We don't really worry about plants with coronaviruses, but bats, for example, can carry many different coronaviruses and actually not get sick at all. There are lots of different species that can be infected with coronaviruses. And in fact, some of our common colds are caused by different coronaviruses. The coronavirus that we're talking about right now is SARS-CoV-2. And SARS-CoV-2 stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. So this is the current strain that is causing the current pandemic. The disease that this virus causes is called coronavirus disease 2019. That's the set of symptoms that we get when we are infected by SARS-CoV-2. So when we look at the specific structure for SARS-CoV-2, what you're seeing are the things that we've already talked about. The interesting thing about this particular virus is that it has an RNA genome, not a DNA genome. Okay, so this is an RNA virus, and it has a bunch of associated proteins with it. And so if you look at the top, that sort of purplish sort of knob that is all around this entity is the spike glycoprotein, and that's the protein that we have to watch. That's the spike protein that allows this virus to enter your cells. And Nicole's going to talk more about how that happens. In addition to what you're seeing here, there is a lipid envelope that surrounds this virus. Again, that is coming from the host cell from which it infected. And the thing about washing your hands is that when you wash your hands, you disrupt that lipid envelope, and that actually destroys the virus. So washing your hands is really important to prevent the spread of viruses, because that virus cannot exist without that lipid envelope. So even if you had the virus on your hands, when you wash your hands and disrupt the envelope, the virus proteins and the virus RNA cannot now infect you. So hand washing is a really important thing to be doing. I'm going to pass this over to Nicole now so she can talk to you more about how replication happens and how the vaccines work.
Thanks, Monica. I want to add that sometimes it helps people understand with washing your hands and the lipids. You know, if you ever see those Dawn dish soap commercials where they have soap and you see the oil droplets coming off a pan or something like that, soap and lipids or oils don't mix. And so that's why Monica's saying this, that if we use soap, we can disrupt that lipid envelope. Okay, so when viruses replicate, first of all, I should back up and say they have to have replication occur for them to survive. Like Monica mentioned just a moment ago, they have to have a host cell in order to survive. And so what they do is they move into host cells, use the host cell's machinery to replicate, and then they can spread to other host cells for survival. Okay? So what we're seeing in this image up here is the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it moves to the surface of the host cell. And you can see the spike protein that Monica mentioned earlier. In this image, it's these red little structures sticking out of the virus, and it attaches to a receptor, which are these red things on our cells. That's the ACE2 receptor, if you have heard of that in the media. That's something that we find in our cells. this spike protein connects to that receptor and kind of docks the virus on the surface of our cell. From there, the virus is able to enter our cell. It does so, and the RNA genome part of the virus, that's what this squiggly line is then going to be replicated by using our cellular machinery. So what you're seeing over here is a ribosome. That is an organelle. That is a structure inside our cells that replicates and synthesizes proteins. I shouldn't say replicates, it synthesizes proteins. And so this RNA virus uses human cellular machinery to make its own proteins and reassemble a capsid, that structure around it, and its spike proteins to then replicate itself and survive. Okay. Once it reassembles and replicates like this, it can then move out of the human cell, host cell, and then infect other cells, and then keep doing this over and over again. Okay, so just briefly, I want to talk a little bit about how the RNA vaccines, so the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in particular, how they work against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So in this image, that blue thing we just saw moving was actually the vaccine, okay? And the vaccine is going to contain this orange squiggly line of messenger RNA. And we're going to then use the ribosome, our cell machinery, to create the spike protein of the COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay? So the messenger RNA that we are using here is a small sequence of genetic information from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And the ribosome is using that genetic information to create just a little piece of the spike protein. So then we put the spike protein on our cells, and we can create these Y-shaped structures behind this, the antibodies against that spike protein. Okay. The thought then is that our immune system will do a couple things here. It will not only produce antibodies in response to the vaccine, those antibodies will be able to bind future virus that comes into our body and prevent the virus from actually entering any other host cells. Okay, so that's the one thing that it does. The second thing that this process does is create what we call memory. So we have immune system cells that will remember this process and this ability to create antibodies, hopefully long term. Okay, so that's the two things we're trying to do with this vaccine. So as you see in this image here, now these blue antibodies that our immune system has produced can now do what we call neutralize the virus. So it will come to the virus and bind to the spike protein of the virus if that were to enter your body and prevent that virus from entering host cells. Okay. So again, this spike protein's really key. That's what Monica was mentioning earlier. And we know the genetic information in the RNA genome of this virus to be able to use a little bit of that genetic information to make the mRNA vaccines. So we use the genetic information of the virus to then create this immune response to the virus. So I'm going to hand it back to Monica, and she's going to talk a little bit about variants.
All right. So getting back to something that Nicole was mentioning about, we know the genome, the sequence of the genome of this virus, and that's actually very important. Scientists have been sequencing the genome of this virus since probably January 2020. Okay, that's when the first sequence was published. And what we know about viruses is that all viruses evolve. All viruses will change over time. During that replication process that Nicole was telling you about, there are usually random mutations that will happen. There's not a real good proofreading, although this virus does not mutate nearly as rapidly as other viruses. We're actually very fortunate that it's a coronavirus and not influenza, because influenza mutates very, very rapidly. So this virus does mutate and has been mutating. And we can continue to take samples from patients with SARS-CoV-2 and sequence that virus to see what those changes are. And so what we're looking for, what scientists are looking for when they are sequencing this, is they want to see if there are mutations that are going to cause one or all three of the factors that I have listed on the board. That is a change in transmissibility or infectiousness, a change in virulence, which is basically how severe the disease, how severe your COVID could possibly be, and then whether or not this virus will somehow evade your immune system, either by evading the antibodies that you build naturally because you've gotten COVID before, or the antibodies you have built because you've been vaccinated. It could also be those therapeutics that we're giving people who are sick with COVID, like some of the monoclonal antibodies that we're providing to individuals who are ill, or even our diagnostic tools, those tools that we use to actually find out if you're infected with this virus. So what I'm showing you here are the spike proteins of 3 variants that you are probably familiar with because you have read or heard about these variants in the news. So the alpha variant, the beta variant, and the current variant that we're dealing with this next wave that we've had in this pandemic, which is the Delta variant. And those changes that have happened at the spike protein have changed some of these indicators: transmissibility, disease virulence, or immune evasion. So let's go ahead and talk about how the variants are being monitored. You can go ahead and switch the slide. Oh, it's up there, sorry. So when we are looking at these variants, the World Health Organization has been monitoring these variants again since January 2020. And so we categorize them in 2 ways. Either we have variants of interest or we have variants of concern. And so the variants of interest are those strains of this virus that have had genetic changes that may affect the characteristics of the virus and then may possibly cause an emerging public health concern. A variant of concern includes that above criteria, like they're usually already on the list of a variant of interest, but they have then had mutations that have increased transmissibility or increased virulence or increased our immune evasion, or something that our public health measures may no longer work. So when we look at these variants of interest, you can see these are the various variants of interest that are currently designated by the World Health Organization. I pulled this off of their website 2 days ago. So this is as up to date as we could get it. And so what you'll see on the far right is the date of designation. So those were the dates that they were designated as a variant of interest. The date next to it is when they were first documented, and in some cases, what areas they've been documented. So you can see the one at the bottom is the variant of interest that is currently been in the news, and that's Mu. That was found in Colombia in January 2021 and was just posted as a variant of interest on August 30th. And so again, the concern is whether or not this variant will have mutations that will allow it to evade the current vaccines that we have. And so that's why it's being observed right now. Lambda came out in June. Lambda was found in California. I'm not sure the other states that Lambda was found in, but Lambda was in the United States, as is Mu. Mu was found in Florida and some other states as well. So it is a variant of interest, though not a variant of concern, which are those listed on the next slide here. So these are the ones I'm sure you're more familiar with: alpha, beta, Gamma, you might not be as familiar with it, but that was the strain in Brazil that was causing all kinds of problems. And then the current strain that we're dealing with, which is the Delta variant. So you can see the dates of designation and then the documentation of where the samples were taken and when they were first documented. So Alpha was first documented in September 2020, last year in the UK. And then they had an outbreak in December, January. They had quite a spike going on. They went back into lockdown for that reason. Beta was actually found earlier than that in South Africa, and so that was designated in December, also December 2020, and South Africa was really dealing with that variant at that time as well. As I mentioned, Brazil around the same time had a different variant that was designated, and that was around the same time in January is when that became a designated concern. Delta, of course, was a variant of interest in April, and then became a variant of concern by May. Was first discovered in India in 2020 and did cause quite a large outbreak in India, and now we are dealing with that Delta variant right now. Now, the way scientists look at this is we look at this from an evolutionary lens, okay? There was a starting ancestor, and that was the first virus that was found in Wuhan, China. And you can see that up in the far left-hand corner there, that orange near December 2019. And from there, what you are seeing on this image is a family tree of how this virus has emerged, how this virus has evolved over time. So every single dot you see up there is a dot that is a virus that was sequenced from a COVID-19 patient, okay? And you can see they're clustering. And so those clusters are telling us that those are mutations that have arisen, and then those viruses have now those are like the strains that are happening right now. So this is what we're sort of seeing over evolutionary time. And the different colors up there are designating which variant of concern that you're seeing. So on the far right, the yellow dots on the bottom, that's the Alpha variant. And so that was, of course, first discovered in the UK. And so those are all samples from people who have been infected with the Alpha variant. Next to that, or just left to that, is the Gamma variant that was found in Brazil. In the middle, that dark orange is the Delta variant that we're dealing with currently. And then that light orange from there is the Beta variant that was found in South Africa. Now, some of the other colors are variants of interest that we're watching. So again, the World Health Organization is keeping a very close eye on these variants of interest because we don't want them to gain the mutations for them to become variants of concern. So hopefully that makes sense. Another thing I want to mention is this antigenic map. So an antigenic map is really kind of telling us how far these strains of the SARS-CoV-2 have drifted from the original virus that was found in Wuhan. And when they drift a little bit further apart, then we have more concern about whether our antibodies are able to neutralize this virus, okay? And so you can see that fortunately, the current variants of concern have not drifted too far away from the original variant. Although Beta is quite different from the original variant. You can see Beta is sort of the furthest away. But the concern is that if this goes further away. So if this was, if the original virus was in a city, right now, it's like the strains are just kind of moving, taking bus rides to different parts of the city. Okay, now the concern would be is if it actually then shifted so much that it's in a different country. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid having all of these mutations that could possibly allow this virus to increase transmissibility, increase disease severity, and increase immune evasion. Delta is much more infectious than Alpha or Beta, much more infectious. It's taking less virus, and people are shedding more virus with it, which is why Delta really was able to take over. So we don't want to have any more of those types of mutations happening, because then all of the work we've done with vaccinating may be all for naught, because we might have to regroup if there's a mutation in a strain that could then lead to immune evasion. So that's a big problem. That's a big problem. So why don't you go ahead and talk?
Yes, so one of the best ways to combat this is to try to have a mass vaccination effort, which Sara will be talking about. What the government and other entities are trying to do is to try to have a mass vaccination event so that we can stop this virus in its tracks and prevent it from mutating, and doing what Monica is suggesting, continuing to get further and further away from that original strain. And with any vaccination, there are risks. And so we wanted to address that because we get asked a lot about what are some of the risks of vaccination. And with any vaccination, there are risks. When you go to a physician's office and get a vaccination, or a pharmacy, they hand you a piece of paper that says the potential risks, okay? So the common risks for the COVID-19 vaccination, and you'll see some numbers here. There's been over 370 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccination already in the United States, and over 5.3 billion doses worldwide. Some common side effects are those that you might expect from a normal immune response to anything that's foreign into your body. Okay, so any vaccination that you have the potential to have swelling, redness, and pain at the injection site because you're putting a needle into a muscle. Okay, and you might have an immune response because you've injected something foreign into your body, like any other vaccine. You may have some of these other common side effects like fever, headache, and the others that you see there, because that is part of a normal immune response. That is kind of a good thing. Your body is actually taking that vaccine and using it to create mount an immune defense. Okay, I've been asked this quite a bit by some of my students, and so I just want to point out, I'm sorry if that's a little difficult to see, but it says these symptoms are not due to COVID infection. Okay, the symptoms you're getting when you are vaccinated are due to your immune system functioning the way it should be. Okay, you're not putting COVID virus into your body. You're getting a little piece of it, and your immune system is functioning. Okay, now, there's a lot of talk about the very, very rare adverse reactions. And like I said earlier, other vaccinations have rare adverse reactions as well. Some of these are the same as if you were to get a flu shot. Okay, so I just want to reiterate that there is really nothing unusual about very rare adverse reactions. Okay. These are some of the rare adverse reactions that have been seen after COVID-19 vaccination. The first is anaphylaxis, which is simply just an allergic response. Okay. Patients or people that are getting vaccinated are going to be monitored for 15 to 20 minutes. And if people do have more concern about allergic reactions, they will be monitored longer by medical professionals. And you see only about 2 to 5 people per million have experienced this. And most of the time they are treated and are perfectly fine after a little while, okay? The next condition you see here, Guillain-Barré syndrome, this has been seen with the Johnson & Johnson or the Janssen vaccine, which below you see has had 14.5 million doses given in the US. This condition, this syndrome, is also seen after a flu vaccination as well. Sometimes this occurs when the body's own immune system starts attacking some nerve cells. So there are some sensations that may occur from this, and most people fully recover with treatment from this condition. So it's a temporary condition. There have been some cases of myocarditis and pericarditis after the second mRNA vaccine in male adolescents. So what is that? Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart muscle itself, And pericarditis is inflammation of the cavity and the surrounding around the heart, so the membranes that kind of surround the heart. And most of these patients experience this temporarily. With rest and with medical treatment, they are fine and they recover. Okay, there is work being done by the CDC right now to ensure that there isn't a true link here between the mRNA vaccines and these conditions. And finally, you've probably heard of this. This one has been more in the news probably than the others, that with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there has been a number of people, 46 confirmed cases out of 14.5 million doses. Now, that's a one-dose vaccination, so 14.5 million people. There have been 46 confirmed cases of thrombosis, which is blood clotting, and thrombocytopenia syndrome. That is low platelets. So there is concern with that vaccine for women between the ages of 18 and 49, that they should just be aware of that and speak with their physicians if they were to receive that vaccine. And it should be said that that vaccine uses more traditional vaccine approaches. So some people are a little more comfortable with that, with the new technology of the mRNA vaccines, but it is a different way of getting your immune system to respond to COVID. Okay. As far as the risk of death after COVID-19 vaccination, that one did not show up on this projection very well, I apologize, but 0.002% of people have died after a COVID-19 vaccination. Now, what that highlighted phrase or sentence says is that this does not mean that the vaccine actually caused the death or caused a health problem. Any death within a certain time period after vaccination needs to be reported to the CDC. There's not necessarily a correlation with that. So just seeing the numbers, if an 85-year-old person were to receive the vaccine and pass away shortly after that, that would be reported as a death after vaccination. So there has not been a link at this point in time to any fatal situation after COVID-19 vaccination. Okay, that's a really tiny percent. Okay, so they are relatively safe vaccines. Okay, to put that in perspective, we wanted to show you just two other scary things for people to show you other risks. If you have been attacked or are worried about being attacked by a shark in the United States, you have a 1 in 5 million chance of that. So if you remember, I said anaphylaxis, you have 2 in a million, right? So we're putting these kinds of things in perspective, right? Not all that common here. For being struck by lightning in your lifetime, you have a 1 in 15,000 chance, 1 in 15,300 chance. See some of these adverse reactions, but the risks are quite minimal for individuals. To put other things in perspective, we wanted to share some information. If you go to the World Health Organization website, you can see dashboard information there. And this is showing you, as of last week, because we started working on this last week, there were 221 million confirmed COVID cases in the world and 4.5 plus million deaths in the world since January of 2020. Okay. So in 20 months, we have seen 4.5 plus. Today, on the way to work, I heard 4.6 million deaths worldwide, and 660,000 plus Americans since January of 2020. So here's a risk factor here for you. That's 1 in 500 people that have died from COVID. Okay? Monica has some other graphs to show and discuss.
Yes, so these images that you're seeing here are actually showing you COVID-19 cases per 100,000 people in a population that were reported globally last week. And so the scale that you can see there you can sort of see where the United States is in comparison to the rest of the countries globally. And so we do have one of the highest cases reported in the last 7 days, over, I believe, 300 per 100,000 people is what that is documenting there. On the next slide, you will see then the number of COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 population that's been reported globally. And again, you can see that we, where the United States is in respect to the rest of the countries globally with dealing with COVID-19. Just to kind of give you some perspective on that in terms of the estimated deaths caused by seasonal flu, it's between 290 to 650,000 annually. That number is worldwide. That is a global number. So this is definitely not seasonal flu. Go ahead, Nicole. Okay.
We get asked this question quite a bit. I'm sure Sara does as well. What about the long-term vaccine side effects? There haven't been any studies that have shown any long-term vaccine side effects. There have been people that have taken the vaccine about a year ago now, right? They were in clinical trials. But it is important to note that messenger RNA, when it is injected, it degrades within a few days. It's very unstable. So it does not stay in the body a long time. And most of the injected material stays in the muscle or in the nearby lymph nodes, which is what we want it to do. We want it to go to the immune system lymph nodes to create this immune response. And the spike protein that we produce only remains for a few weeks. Proteins don't last forever in the body. They get degraded and are destroyed very frequently and pretty rapidly. So that doesn't stick around in your body either. What does stick around in your body is the memory cells, or are the memory cells that you've created that will remember the spike protein, okay? There's some information coming out now that folks that have had COVID-19 and then get vaccinated may have super immunity. Okay, so if you've had COVID-19 and you say, I don't need to get vaccinated, we would probably say, no, you should still get vaccinated. There's a lot of information that says that if you had a mild case of COVID-19, you likely don't have a strong immune response. You might not have all those memory cells that someone that had a more severe case would. And so if you are vaccinated, the immune system, every time that spike protein and that COVID virus comes into your body, you'll create a stronger and stronger immune response. So the more you are subjected to the COVID-19 virus or the SARS-CoV-2 virus or the vaccine, the more immunity you will have. Okay. This is going to be kind of towards the end of our discussion. We'll be handing it over to Sara in just a minute, but we wanted to kind of address some of the common misconceptions that we have seen and heard. I'm sure Sara will be talking about some of these as well. You know, like we've heard, you know, I'm healthy, I work out, I eat well, I'm going to be fine. This is not a virus that is discriminating against people that are not healthy, and I guess I'm not saying that correctly, but we just want to say that sometimes folks have underlying conditions, and you don't know that you have that, and you could have, you know, been infected, and you could get really sick. There's a lot of healthy people that are extremely sick and or dying. Herd immunity. Want to talk a little bit about that. Herd immunity is the idea that vaccination and becoming immune is more of a social thing. We're all in this together because we are protecting those of us that are not able to get vaccinated or those that are more likely to become severely ill. This image here is just showing you that your choice to vaccinate matters to others in your community and to everyone around you. When you are vaccinated, like you see down here in the bottom panel, if you're immunized and healthy in gold or yellow here, even when there are folks that are not immunized but still healthy or not immunized and sick and contagious, we can contain the spread of the virus. So herd immunity is something that we strongly believe in and would love to get towards, okay? Sara is a director in public health, so she can talk about that more, that making these social decisions, these moral decisions, don't just affect you and your freedom. They affect public health. Okay? I already discussed introducing the virus to your body so you get COVID from it. That is not what happens in vaccines. There are no microchips in the vaccine. mRNA does not alter your cell's DNA. We showed you how it works. It doesn't enter into your DNA. It's nothing permanent. It is going to be removed from your body. Infertility in COVID-19 vaccines. There have been no studies that link that at all. In fact, pregnant women are highly encouraged to get the vaccine to protect themselves and their babies. And we've also heard scientists and physicians are getting paid to promote the vaccine, and I can 100% guarantee that that is not true. Okay, so finally, Monica can finish here, and then we'll pass it to Sara.
Bottom line is that, you know, we still hear that people who are vaccinated are still able to maybe transmit the virus or maybe even have a breakthrough infection and have a mild case of it. The fact of the matter is the vaccine is not there to prevent you 100% from not getting COVID-19. There is no vaccine around that protects you at 100% level. But the goal of this vaccine is to prevent hospitalization and severe disease and to prevent death. And so in order for us to reach herd immunity, you know, there are a lot of scientists now that are very concerned that we will never reach herd immunity because we are not, we have these variants now that are changing, right? And if we're not doing this fast enough, we might not be able to keep up with this arms race that's sort of happening between us and the vaccine and having neutralizing antibodies and the variants that are just naturally happening by random mutation. So it really is that sort of arms race of natural selection where we're talking about survival of the fittest, and if they have a mutation that arises that makes them more successful, that's the variant of choice. That's the variant that's going to be successful. And if that evades our immune system, then we're in really big trouble. We're back at square one. And we don't want to be back at square one. Okay.
Okay. I'll move forward to... Yeah. I was just going to put it on the front, right? Nick, it is at the end of this, correct? Okay. Get a lot of extra stuff. Yay. Thank you. Is this you? Is that yours?
Yes.
Okay. We're good.
Hello, everybody. I just really wanted to take a minute at the end of Dr. Monica's. You can't hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't think they can.
Oh. Hello, everybody. At the end of, first let me just say that I feel very, very fortunate to work at a community college that supports you know, topics and conversations like Democracy Days, and I get to understand that I am truly privileged to be able to work with Dr. Monica Hallwood and Dr. Nicole Pinaire, and the presentation that they just gave with clarity and concise, factual information about science and the science of viruses is really impressive and extremely important. We all have to do our part to, you know, share that information. I also consider myself really lucky. I get to introduce now Sara Evers. She is, as Paul said, the acting director for St. Charles County Department of Public Health. She's been the operations chief for the county's response to COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. She's been in place since the very beginning of the pandemic in St. Charles County. She is responsible for policies and procedures and development, for case investigations, for vaccinations, as well as the viral mitigation strategies. She's been with the county since 2015 as the resident epidemiologist, the communicable disease program manager, and now, as we said, the acting director of the public health department. Sara received her Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Truman State University and her Master's degree in Public Health with a concentration in epidemiology, specializing in infectious diseases. Some of what you were just hearing from Dr. Hallwood and Dr. Pinaire. And specializing in infectious diseases from St. Louis University. She has worked in the hospital setting as well as in clinical and research laboratories where some of her work has even been published. In addition to her experience as this epidemiologist and infectious disease specialist, Sara was an adjunct professor in the Lindenwood Accelerated Degree Program for Healthcare Management and with the Franklin University, which I did not know this, Sara, Franklin University for the Saudi Electronic University in Saudi Arabia. I'm grateful for the strong and collaborative relationship that St. Charles Community College has been able to establish with the County Department of Public Health. Sara Evers is a wealth of knowledge, and SCC is fortunate to work so closely with Sara and the Public Health Department throughout the pandemic. So it's my privilege now to say thank you to Nicole and Monica and to let Sara sort of take it from here. So Sara Evers.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity here today. It is wonderful to have some of our biology partners here to help make the segue into what I'm going to touch on. And what I'd like to touch on today is where are we right now? What is the government's responsibility in this? And specifically, what is the Department of Public Health's responsibility? And where do we go? And so one of the things that I really wanted to elaborate on was this concept of the variant. And when we talk about public health responsibility, we deal with communicable diseases every single day. I really wish we didn't, but that's what we do. It's part of what we do. We do it through our immunization program that we have active, working on childhood immunizations, booster shots for adults to receive immunizations, those that are going into healthcare settings that need additional protection or in specialized work. That's part of what we do. The other part of what we do is dealing with communicable diseases that are transmitted to one another. Some of those could be through sexual transmission. So we have a full STD program that works on identification of sexually transmitted diseases and treatments for those diseases. And then in addition to that, or as a part of that, is our communicable disease program. So in our communicable disease program, anytime someone has an illness that can be transmitted from one person to another, we have a team of nurses and epidemiologists that it's their job to investigate those cases. We investigate those cases because our goal is to stop the transmission. And it's exactly highlighting the pieces that these wonderful faculty just described to you, that as long as a disease is able to make a variation of itself, it will elude the treatment and the vaccination processes that we already have in place for it. And we see that every single day. For example, today we have, I don't know how many, by the time I left, new cases of salmonella. We know salmonella is a bacterium that can be found actively in some of our poultry. It can be actively found in some of our cattle, and that can be transmitted to humans. And when that gets into a human body, guess what? Bad things happen. Our bodies can't necessarily handle that bacterium, and it goes into our gut, and it creates a lot of problems in our intestinal systems. Some people, that's not as big of a deal as it is for others, but that's part of what we're doing. And one of the things that we look at is with every single case of those, we type them. We look at the genetic material because whether it's a bacterium or a virus, it has some type of a fingerprint genetic identity. And what we're looking at with that is what is the identity of the disease that I had to the person that had it before me, or the person that has it down the street, or the person in the next city over. And we try to find commonalities to that so that we can figure out where it came from and stop its transmission. In public health, we're looking at the greater good of the entire community and figuring out how we can help them have a better healthy lifestyle, a better healthy life, and prevent any pieces that are introduced into that can harm their life. And so COVID is just a primary example of what we do every single day, and we're having to do this in light of COVID. So this variation piece is incredibly important. And as Dr. Wood said, we need to stop the transmission to prevent further variation of COVID. COVID, the longer it stays in someone's body, the more opportunity it has to replicate, and every opportunity that it has to replicate, it can mutate and change its material to try to evade some of those other processes that we have in place. So as she mentioned, the vaccine is not going to 100% prevent us from contracting disease, but the hope is that it stops it from developing into your system or replicating even further into your body. And that replication could be the mutation that is the next strain of concern that could harm someone else. So it's stopping that transmission in its tracks. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to open up my phone so I can see the slides a little bit better for myself here. But let's talk about where we are right now. So I pulled these slides off of yesterday, and we have an active dashboard at the St. Charles County Department of Public Health website where you can see what our caseload looks like every single day. And I can tell you it is very active right now. The number of cases that we have in our community, and when you compare it to where we were a year ago and you look at the huge peak in that top right-hand corner, it doesn't seem as scary, but the problem is that we're seeing right now is the shift in age population. So back when we were at the height of COVID a year ago, the number of children that were contracting and transmitting COVID virus at that time was in the 5% range. I calculated it yesterday. We're now up to 39% of the active cases we have are in children less than 18 years old. And the bulk of those are in the 10 to 15-year-old range. Well, we know children tend to be very social creatures. They're around others of their age group. They congregate, they share things they shouldn't share. And so we have them transmitting virus very quickly to one another, which, as we talked about earlier, the second that virus has the opportunity to replicate in someone's body, there are going to be mutations from that. So we need to be able to stop that transmission. The other concern that we have here is that the vaccines that they have been talking about, we all know, have heard publicly that children are not eligible for those. So it's 12 years old and up is what is eligible for Pfizer. And so that's a problem. We have a population that has no antibody response assistance in their body. It's only from their natural immunity. They aren't getting that extra boost that those that are vaccinated have. I also wanted to point out, this is just the month of September. So today is what, the 16th? When we look at this slide up here to the right, this is by age. And the 5 to 10 is the orange, and the 14 to 19 is the pink. And if you'll look at the yellow, that's the other new piece that we're seeing right now. The yellow are their parents. That in the previous months last year, and you can see from some of our previous transmission data, that was in the over 70 population. Maybe the over 65 population is where we were seeing the transmission, and now we're seeing the transmission in children and their families at home. And they're a little more active than our over 70 and our over 80-year-old population. So we're seeing higher transmission there. The other piece that I wanted to show is what's happening in hospitals. And that's been very active in the news, and it is a very realistic point that when hospitals are full, there isn't room for anyone. No matter what your illness is of that day or where you need assistance, whether you break your leg, whether you have a car crash, or whether you have a heart attack, a stroke, or have COVID pneumonia, there is no room for you. And so St. Louis is a major hub in this part of the state, in most part of the state, in part of Illinois, where our hospital systems are the strongest ones in this area. And so they're taking the worst of the worst cases. And when there's no room for anyone to take the worst of the worst cases, there are going to be extreme adverse outcomes in those situations. So there are going to be deaths associated with other things that could have been prevented. And that is part of our job, is preventing those deaths where we can. So these slides are all very important to impress upon you where we are in the current situation. And some of it is preventable. They have done a wonderful job talking about the variants. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the fingerprints and what we are seeing. When we talk about the variants of concern and the variants of interest, part of what we're looking at, and you may have heard some of these names previously where it would say, you might have heard B177 or B176, B116. That's talking about the genetic fingerprint of what that RNA looked like and where it was on particular sequences. And so what we're highlighting right now is right here. The orange is Delta. These other colors up here, most of them are alpha, some of them are the the iota, some of them are the gamma. They didn't take hold in the community because they weren't as transmissible as Delta is. And when we looked at variants of concern and we're looking at what's happening with Mu, we're not seeing that transmission right now, and it has to be stronger than Delta to be able to take over the transmission in that community. And so all of what we are seeing right now is almost 100% Delta. One of the other things that we can look at with transmission of SARS-CoV-2 is, you may have heard a little bit in the news about sewer shed. And so to make it kind of gross, they're taking sewer data from different parts of the state, and this is happening through the whole country, and looking at what is in the sewers, basically coming out as fecal matter from the public, and they're able to look at what bacteria and what viruses are in the sewer system. And one of the pieces that are really helpful to our variant assessment is related to SARS-CoV and the sewer shed. So they're collecting sewer data from all different parts of the country, and especially here in Missouri, and they're looking at that every few days to see, is there any shift in terms of what genetic material is in the sewers and how that is affecting our population. And we have found it to be slightly predictive of outbreaks in those communities. We have been in the Delta range for genetic material for going on probably 6 to 8 weeks now. And there's been no change. It's holding strong, and it's still at incredibly high levels. So that tells us that there is very active infection within our community. There are people that have active infection. They may not know it, they may know it, but they're using our sewer system, and we're able to identify that. So the fact that Delta is so strong is a concern. We have to implement other mitigation strategies to stop this transmission and stop its potential mutation. So there are some things that we don't know or impacts how a variant is classified. And some of that we've already talked about in terms of its transmissibility, and one of the big concerns is, how is our vaccine coverage going to stand up to it? And right now we are seeing excellent vaccine coverage for the Delta variant. We are seeing excellent vaccine coverage for all the other variants that we've seen. So whether that's the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna, or the Johnson & Johnson Janssen vaccine, there is great coverage. But the ultimate concern is, if this virus mutates just a little bit more, it could move away from the proteins and the pieces that are as part of our current vaccine, and we will have to switch strategies. When we talk about vaccine, one of the questions that I often hear is, what shortcuts were taken? How did this happen so fast? And one of my answers with that has to do with support. Whether that's financial support, whether that's academic support, and whether that's other research support from pharmaceuticals. And essentially, when a vaccine normally comes to be, the vaccine process can be very tedious and labor intensive. That pharmaceutical company or whoever is looking at that particular vaccine or that development has to go through all the steps in the process. They're usually doing 15 other things at the same time, and they don't want to put all of their investment into something that they aren't sure if it will make it to the end and be a successful vaccine or a successful medication. Well, because SARS-CoV was taking over internationally, it was worth all of their time, all of their efforts, and they got some additional financial support from all countries to try to support the advancing and the dedication of their machinery to develop this vaccine and their time to get through the clinical studies. So there weren't shortcuts taken. They were able to go faster because they received that additional support and be able to make it through the process faster. And so that's one of the questions that I receive frequently. It is incredibly important that we vaccinate as many people as we can. I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but I think since we're talking about Democracy Days, we need to talk about specifically what is public health's role in communicable diseases. And the Missouri Code of Regulations, the statute, it's 2020, and it's 20 CSR-2020, and this is where we spend most of our time. And this list in this statute talks about what communicable diseases are. And it talks about what are the communicable diseases of concern in Missouri. Because I will be very frank with you, some of them are transmitted by vectors. So some of them are transmitted by mosquitoes. Some of them are transmitted by animals. And those can be specific to a particular state or a particular region. So the list in Missouri can be just slightly different than other states. It's usually not that different, but they do have some other communicable diseases in other states that we don't have a concern for here. But in this Missouri statute, or the state of regulation, it lists what the communicable diseases are, and it lists what the responsibilities are. And when we look specifically at .040, that lists that public health's responsibility is to identify, investigate, mitigate, and prevent communicable disease transmission. And it's ultimately the state's responsibility, the state's Department of Health and Senior Services responsibility, but they delegate that authority and responsibility to the local public health agencies. So this is our responsibility to protect our community, because we know our community's specialties, we know the special populations we have, we know the mitigation strategies that we need to put in place. So all of these different regulations talk about some of the responsibilities that we host as the local health authority here. So under my authority, it is my responsibility to isolate and quarantine positive cases, whether that's for SARS-CoV-2, whether it's for tuberculosis, whether it's for Shigella or Salmonella. That is ultimately my responsibility, to take the appropriate mitigation strategy for this. One of the other pieces that I think is confusing to people is what is CDC's role in this? So CDC creates the research opportunities. CDC investigates what's going on with a particular disease. They provide extra resources in terms of the lab, because we don't have a lab here in St. Charles that can actually look at the genetic material of every single virus and bacteria. The CDC helps support some of those functions. And they also create where they think is the best place to start. There are additional organizations that participate in this process. There is a National Association of City and County Health Officials. There's city and state and territorial epidemiologists, and we create all of the other pieces that we need to do this. So what qualifies as somebody being a positive case? What qualifies as appropriate in terms of contacts or identification, and what are some of the mitigation strategies that should be put in place? So those groups make all these guidance pieces. I forgot another important one, the immunization practice group that looks at what is the appropriate immunization to use and what is the appropriate dosage and distance between vaccinations. And so some of those pieces all work together. They make recommendations, and then a state decides which pieces of that they want to apply and put into their statute or their regulations. And so the state gives the locals guidance, federals give the state guidance, the state puts it into their regulations or their policy procedures, and then the locals are delegated to do that. And so that's how we all kind of work together. And like I said, this is done on a daily basis. We do this every single week, and I wish diseases would stop transmitting, and I wish people would stop the behaviors sometimes that they can to prevent them, but this is where we live and what we do. One of our pieces of mitigation strategy is this vaccination piece. And I am very proud to say that our health department has taken upon ourselves, and this has been one of our highest priorities for the last almost going on a year now. We started in December and have been going strong ever since, is vaccinations. So our department alone have distributed and administered over 80,000 vaccinations in St. Charles County. That's not for just St. Charles County residents, that's for anybody that visits any of our sites. And so we're incredibly grateful for the opportunity to do this, and it's given us a little bit of closure on a very difficult transition to fighting a new pandemic and trying to navigate this world that we're living in right now. So I want to talk a little bit about what vaccines we have and how that works. So normally the way vaccines work is there are different methods that someone can receive a vaccine. Most people have insurance, and their insurance company can help pay for their vaccine, but there are people in our country that don't have insurance, or they don't have access to proper insurance to get them vaccinations. So that's ultimately our responsibility, is to find those people and help them get what they need. We are a safety net for the public that don't have access to all the resources that they need to have a healthy lifestyle. And so we provide immunizations to people every day, and we do that usually through those that don't have insurance. We have vaccines for children, so that's a program for children under 18 that don't have proper insurance or any insurance, that they can get vaccinations for free through us. We also have an adult version of that, so those that don't have insurance coverage as an adult, there are some vaccines that we can give for free to them, and that's through the federal program and then through the state. And so normally that's how it goes. So if you have insurance, we have billing processes, or if you decide you just want to pay out of pocket, that you can do that as well, but we have free vaccines. One of the wonderful pieces about COVID vaccinations is it is free through the federal programs. So no person in the United States has to pay for that. And we are happy to be able to distribute these vaccines as quickly as possible. In the beginning, you may remember that only certain people could get vaccinated. And it was basically because the pharmaceutical companies couldn't get to the point where they could ramp up creation, or they were just in that phase where they were trying to produce the mass amount of vaccine. And so we had to be careful and strategic in how we rolled that out to those that were considered the highest risk in terms of their immunocompromised status, and those that were in the healthcare systems, because our healthcare systems were already struggling with in terms of what they had in terms of staffing. And so we focused on that in the beginning and then quickly got to all the stages of vaccination. Currently, we still have all three vaccines. So we carry the Pfizer vaccine, which is for 12 and up. We carry the Moderna vaccine, which is for 18 and up. And then we do have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. We have a hotline that is still answered Monday through Friday, and anyone can call and ask questions about our vaccines, or if they're trying to get access to vaccine, or if they just have questions about vaccines for themselves, they can call our hotline, and we have staff available to answer all of those questions. We host a continued variety of events every single week, so we are still, you may not see the advertisements for mass vaccination events. The majority of the community receive vaccines at those times, but there are still many people that have been at different points in their life where they couldn't be vaccinated, or they wanted to be vaccinated but couldn't do it, or didn't have access, or whatever the case may be. They may have had a barrier that was preventing them from being vaccinated, or changed their mind once they received the information that they needed. And so we are still out in the community every single week. We are working with businesses who are trying to help get their employees vaccinated. We are working with specialized populations to reach the homeless, those that are homebound, those that have special needs or physical disabilities that prevent them from getting places. And that's where we are every week in the community. And most of those events are public, and you can see those on our website. We also have vaccine clinics every Friday in our building, which is in St. Charles City on Boone's Lick. And we have staff there every Friday and are still happily vaccinating anyone that comes to see us. We receive regular vaccine shipments from the state of Missouri. It actually comes through the federal level. And we, as I mentioned, have given, I think the number is closer to 81,000 now today, but I just wanted everyone to know that they still have access to vaccine at any time if they are interested, or if they want to ask specific medical questions, that they can do that with our staff and make an appointment and work through all those details and get the questions that they are most concerned about. We, at our highest point, which was probably in April of 2021, we had mass vaccination clinics through the assistance of all of our community partners. So that included students here from the community college. We had the Missouri National Guard helping us, the ambulance district, AmeriCorps, and a lot of other volunteers throughout the community that helped us. And we were proud to still hold the title for the most vaccinations given in one day, which was over 4,500. And we had a very well-oiled machine going, and we are willing and able to ramp that up at any time. So if vaccinations are opened up for children, or if we have a third booster dose that is needed, we are able to ramp that back up and take care of anyone who's interested. So as I make that segue, let's talk about booster doses a little bit. And so one of the pieces that is still being researched and there's information is still being collected about is who really needs more antibodies in their system. So we talked about the fact that the vaccine is basically giving your cells memory, and we don't really know how long natural immunity lasts. So if I have COVID, how long do those memory cells last in my body? And I can tell you anecdotally, we have seen cases where one person has mild case of COVID and then a month later they get it again, and it's even worse the second time. Or we've seen people that have had immunity for 3 months. We've seen people with immunity for 6 months. It really is a personal body issue. We don't know what someone's personal immunity is going to be, and we aren't seeing consistent details from the virus as a whole when we collect all this information together. And so that natural immunity piece is also a struggle. One of the vaccine booster pieces is we don't know, or the research is still pending, and that's one of the things they're still talking about, is how long do we believe vaccine immunity is lasting. They have great data that shows that it seems to be lasting at least 6 months. They're still researching it, but it looks to be good, even further than that. And it all depends on the variant piece. How far is this going to mutate from the original virus that we used to make the vaccine from? And so all of this is taken into account. And actually, we're fortunate. It's right here on the last part, and they just changed it last night after I handed this slide over. The council that looks at immunization practices was supposed to have their meeting tomorrow. And in that meeting, they were going to formally discuss and do one final review of all the data on booster doses for the general public. And they are postponing that until next week. But the FDA meeting to assess booster doses with Pfizer and their approval for booster doses is still going to be held tomorrow. And so there are a lot of very active meetings that are going on right now that advise what should happen in all these situations. So as of today, as of how I speak right here, the only people that are eligible for a third dose of a Moderna or a Pfizer vaccine are those that are considered severely immunocompromised. And I've listed some of those here. And so the reason we're talking about is their system does not have the capacity to do the normal process that we discussed in terms of building that immunity. Their cells aren't working properly, or maybe they've had a major reconstruction of their immune system in their body through an organ transplant, or they've had to have very suppressive medications because of the other illnesses or diseases that are in their body very prominent. And so those are the ones that we've identified right now. Those people in those specialized situations do need a booster dose. They need more memory in their body. And so they're the only ones eligible right now. But there will be very active information to come. I'm sure everyone has also seen in the news the possible approval of Pfizer for 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds. And that is very, they're assessing that research every single minute. They're looking at the clinical trials that had happened. We were hoping that we would have approval back in August. And once they started reviewing all the data, they decided that they needed more data to look at. And so they asked the clinical trials to go back and expand on what they had. And that was why we had another delay. Everything I hear at this point is that it is imminent, that there will be vaccination opportunities for those that are under 12 soon. Do we have a time frame for that? Not just yet. So that's the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. I know that there's probably some active questions out there, so we'll go ahead and, if we have time, and entertain any questions.
Thank you so much. The three of you was fantastic. It was a very wonderful, wonderfully informative panel. We're just about out of time, but is there anybody that has a question? I know I've got a couple online. There was one comment that asked about whether we could attach slides. Sure. Because the video is a little bit blurry. And so I wonder if, and I talked to Nick earlier, he's gone, but I talked to Nick earlier, and he said that it was possible if you wanted to attach some of either the whole presentation or even just some of the key slides you wanted to share, we could attach them to the web page, because this is going to be available afterwards as well on the web page. So sure. Some nods. So yeah, so we'll reach out to Nick and make sure we can do that. Is there anybody with a question here? There's a couple online, but I want to reward those who actually showed up in person.
Hi, quick question. Is there a source that you can lead us or send us to that has maybe a list of vocabulary of some of the words and terminology that's used on a common basis and explaining things just to share with others?
Sure. So I'll speak from the public health side of it. The CDC website actually there is a full page of terminology that we use in relation to quarantine, isolation, case definitions, and how we classify all the cases related to COVID. And there's additional information on COVID vaccine terminology, but they probably have some additional information in terms of the full biology.
Actually, I was going to also recommend the CDC, and the World Health Organization also has some really good educational information as well.
Well, I know we're out of time, but I got one question that I've heard. I'm not sure if you know the answer to it. I've heard that there's a new supposed method, because you were mentioning when you get injected, it's muscle memory where the vaccine remembers it. And I've heard that if you get a nasal spray vaccination, you might actually have a better response or a better Any awareness of how that would work?
I can take that if you'd like. So there are different vaccines out there that are available in different forms. So there's some vaccinations that are actually done through an oral liquid that you drink. There are some that are done through nasal sprays. There are some that are done through injections in different ways. So that's not unheard of. It's been something that's been explored from the beginning, and it's still in clinical trials, still in research. So there's the possibility that there could be. Oftentimes the nasal sprays are actually live virus. So there is a risk with any respiratory virus that if you are implementing that in that method. But smallpox is another one. That's actually a live virus that's put on the skin and replicates that way. So there's some risk associated with utilizing live attenuated vaccinations.
And just in general, you know, a lot of times when you hear these different methods of delivery, I mean, that's true for medication, that, you know, they're trying to determine the best way to get it to the tissue that they want it to go to. So this just happens to be, you know, using that lipid coating around the messenger RNA. It seems to work best right now intramuscularly, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to develop it another way.
Well, thank you. We have other questions too, but we are out of time. So thank you so much. This will be on the webpage. So thank you. Please, a round of applause for our fantastic panelists.
For those of you that are still here present or here with us online, I just wanted to put in a small plug. If you go to the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services website, if you've been vaccinated, you can register online to win $10,000. They're doing drawings every single week, and those that are under 18 can be eligible for $10,000 added to the Missouri Most account. So if you register, if you've been vaccinated or you are interested in being vaccinated, you can register there.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, I know.